The door chimed softly as Marcus Wynne stepped into the gilded magnolia. Conversation faltered, just for a moment, then resumed in hushed tones, like ripples after a stone hits still water. He didn't glance around. He never did. Instead, he moved with measured confidence. Tailored navy suit, polished black shoes, past white tablecloths and gleaming glassware, toward the corner booth as if it had been waiting for him. The hostess forced a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Wynne." Her voice was brittle porcelain. Marcus gave a short nod, his eyes unreadable. Inside, there was no surprise at her tight jaw or the way her fingers clutched the seating chart as if he might snatch it away. He'd seen that look for decades. In diners that wouldn't serve him, in banks that doubted his signature, in boardrooms that underestimated his voice until they realized it carried the weight of millions. But the years had taught him to let silence speak louder than outrage. She led him through the room. People pretended not to notice, but their glances followed, fleeting, assessing. Some looked away quickly, others held the gaze a second too long. He slid into the booth, its leather creaking under his weight, and rested his hands on the table. From the kitchen pass-through, whispers leaked into the dining room. "That him?" "Yeah, Marcus Wynne. They say he owns half the block downtown, and the rest of the block wishes he didn't." They never mentioned what they really meant, that his wealth didn't erase the color of his skin, and in this town, both things together were dangerous. Marcus unfolded the menu but didn't read it. He could order without looking. What mattered was the quiet discipline of being here at all. It was an act of defiance, just sitting in this corner booth in the most exclusive restaurant in the county. He glanced toward the bar. A group of well-dressed patrons leaned in close, their laughter sharp and metallic. He knew the sound. It was the same laughter he'd heard outside his grandfather's store the day they spray-painted slurs on the brick wall. He adjusted his cufflinks. Calm. Always calm. The waiter assigned to him emerged from the kitchen, menu in hand, but his steps slowed. Another voice called from the back, "Switch with Emily. She's new." Emily. The name was unfamiliar. A rookie, probably nervous. Marcus's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. New people hadn't yet learned the choreography of avoidance. The waiter vanished, and Marcus was left alone again, the low hum of the restaurant washing over him. He let his gaze drift to the window, where the last blush of sunset stained the glass. For a fleeting moment, he remembered sitting outside his mother's kitchen, watching that same color bleed into the sky, dreaming of the day he'd be too rich to be refused service anywhere. And yet, here he was, still watched, still measured, still feared. A shadow crossed the floor toward him. Light footsteps. The new waitress. Emily was about to step into a story she didn't yet know she was part of. The kitchen door swung open behind Emily as she stepped in to grab the order pad. The sound of clattering pans and sizzling oil wrapping around her like heat from a furnace. "New girl, that's your table in the corner," barked Kyle, the head waiter, jerking his chin toward the dining room. "Marcus Wynne. Be quick, be polite, and don't linger." Emily frowned. "Why?" Kyle glanced toward the pass-through window as if the walls themselves could hear him. "Just trust me." The prep cook snorted. "Trust you? You've never been on the receiving end of one of his tirades." Emily hesitated. "Tirades? Please?" Another voice cut in. A hostess perched on the counter, filing her nails. "He's got a temper. Heard he once shut down a city council meeting because they wouldn't approve his building project. That was because they tried to rezone him out of it," the dishwasher said without looking up. "I was there. The man just doesn't take crap from anybody." "That's what I mean," the hostess replied. "Doesn't take crap, but he gives it." The rumors bounced from wall to wall. Half-truths tangled with personal grudges, painting Marcus as a ruthless operator who crushed anyone standing in his way. But beneath their words was something else, a quieter thread Emily picked up on. It wasn't just his money that bothered them. It was that he was a black man who wielded it unapologetically in a town still clinging to an old order. The swinging door creaked, and in stepped Mr. Callahan, the restaurant's owner, tall, silver-haired. his voice a deep drawl honed over decades of giving orders no one questioned. He leaned against the counter. "Wynn's here again," he said, his tone heavy with disdain. "Man thinks he owns this town. Just remember how to handle people like him. Give him what he paid for, nothing more." The room went still for a heartbeat. Emily caught the subtle emphasis on people like him, a phrase that didn't need spelling out. Callahan's gaze landed on her. "You're new. Don't go getting cozy. The less you say, the better." He left as quickly as he'd come, his cologne lingering like a shadow. Emily tightened her grip on the order pad. Something inside her bristled, though she couldn't fully name it yet. She'd grown up in towns like this, heard words like that said in kitchens, back rooms, and parking lots, always in low tones, always with a knowing glance. Kyle waved her toward the door. "Well, he's waiting." Emily exhaled slowly, pushing the door open. Through the narrow gap, she caught sight of Marcus in the corner booth, the late sunlight catching on his cufflinks, his face unreadable. The rumors clung to her ears as she stepped forward, but they didn't match the man she was about to meet. The distance between them shrank with every step. Emily stepped out from the kitchen, the door swinging shut behind her, muffling the low hum of gossip. The dining room felt cooler, quieter, but the tension clung to her skin like steam. Marcus Wynn sat in the far corner, posture relaxed but gaze sharp, his fingers resting loosely against the stem of a water glass. The fading light through the window haloed his figure in warm gold, but his eyes stayed fixed on her approach, steady, assessing. Her heart thudded in her chest. She'd been told to expect someone dangerous, someone fierce enough to intimidate an entire staff. But the man before her didn't radiate malice. There was weight in his gaze, yes, but it was the weight of someone who had carried far too much for far too long. "Good evening, Mr. Wynn," she said, her voice careful but clear. "I'll be your server tonight." For a moment he didn't respond, just studied her, his expression unreadable. Then a small nod. "Emily, isn't it?" Her brows lifted. "Yes." "How?" "I saw you come out of the kitchen." His tone was even, but there was the faintest glint of amusement in his eyes, as if he'd already read half her thoughts. She handed him the menu, though she sensed he didn't need it. "Would you like to start with a drink?" "Coffee," he said. "Black. Hot." There was no rudeness in his delivery, only precision, as though he'd learned long ago to leave no room for misunderstanding. She jotted it down, turning slightly toward the kitchen, when a shadow fell over the table. Mr. Callahan, the owner, stood at her shoulder. "Emily," he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Make sure Mr. Wynn is taken care of, quickly. No need for small talk tonight." Marcus's gaze shifted upward, landing on Callahan with a quiet, piercing stillness. "I'll make sure he's served properly," Emily replied, her tone neutral but firmer than she expected. Callahan's jaw flexed. "Quickly and quietly," he repeated before turning away, his hand brushing the back of Marcus's chair as he passed, a touch that felt more like a claim than a courtesy. Emily glanced at Marcus, unsure whether to apologize for her boss's tone, but he simply raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into the faintest trace of a smirk. "I'm used to it," he said almost casually. "People telling others how to handle me." Something about the way he said it, low even, but edged with decades of memory, made her throat tighten. "I'll get your coffee," she murmured. As she walked back to the kitchen, she caught snippets of conversation from nearby tables. A man at the bar muttered, "Can't believe they let him in here." Another responded with a laugh that carried across the room. Emily kept moving, forcing her steps to stay steady. The weight of the whispers pressed on her chest, but so did something else. A stubborn flicker of curiosity about the man everyone seemed so determined to misunderstand. By the time she returned with his coffee, her eyes met his again, steady, searching. It was the kind of look that told her this night was going to unravel far beyond a simple meal. Emily set the coffee in front of Marcus, steam curling upward like a slow exhale. He thanked her with a nod, his voice low, and took a measured sip. She turned to leave, but the hostess approached with a forced smile. "Need anything else, Mr. Wynn?" she asked, though her eyes remained on Emily, as if Marcus wasn't there. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. No, he said evenly, his gaze holding steady on the hostess until she shifted, mumbled something, and retreated toward the front podium. Emily lingered for a moment, uncertain whether to acknowledge what had just happened. She chose silence, but her stomach nodded. She'd seen awkwardness before in customer service. People stumbling over their words, but this wasn't that. This was avoidance, deliberate and practiced. She refilled his water glass, and as she did, a busboy slid by, rolling his eyes in an exaggerated arc the moment he passed Marcus. Emily caught it. Marcus caught it too. He didn't react, just turned his attention back to the coffee, letting the insult drift away like steam. But inside, the moment settled heavy. For Marcus, every small gesture carried echoes. He'd been the boy standing at the back door of a whites-only diner, waiting for a paper bag with his food inside. The teenager ignored at the hardware counter while the clerk served every white customer first. The man mistaken for a chauffeur outside his own building. Tonight was no different. The faces changed, the setting gleamed, but the current underneath was the same. Emily returned with the bread basket. "Your dinner will be out shortly," she said, her tone softer than before. "Thank you," Marcus replied. His voice was polite but laced with a distance, a shield he'd learned to keep in place. From the corner of her eye, Emily saw the hostess glance toward them again, whispering something to Kyle. They both chuckled before quickly looking away. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. But now Emily was paying attention. She moved through the rest of her tables mechanically, her mind circling back to the corner booth. Marcus didn't demand extra attention, didn't bark orders, didn't play the role they'd warned her about. He simply sat there, eating in measured bites, carrying himself like a man who knew the weight of every stare in the room. By the time his entree arrived, Emily had stopped questioning whether the stories she'd heard were true. She could see it plainly. The problem wasn't Marcus Wynn's behavior, it was the way people chose to see him. As she set the plate down, he met her eyes once more. There was no smile, no smirk, just a steady look that seemed to say, "You see it now too, don't you?" She did, and she knew it was only the beginning. The dinner rush thinned, and the hum of the restaurant softened to a low murmur. Emily moved through her last few tables quickly, but her attention kept drifting back to the corner booth. Marcus sat with his coffee cup half full, his plate nearly empty, his posture still deliberate, shoulders squared, chin lifted. When her section quieted, she found herself walking toward him, unsure if she was following curiosity or something heavier. "Still doing all right?" she asked, clearing a stray crumb from the table. "I'm fine," Marcus said. Then, after a pause, "You've been here how long?" "2 weeks," she replied. "Still learning where everything is." He gave a small chuckle, the sound low and warm. "You'll figure it out. I learned my first business in about the same time. The rest took a little longer." She hesitated, then leaned slightly against the edge of the booth. "What kind of business?" He took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Real estate. Started with one rundown property on the east side. Couldn't get a bank loan, so I borrowed from friends. Fixed it up myself. Rented it out. Bought another. And another." Emily smiled faintly. "That doesn't sound easy." "It wasn't," he said, voice steady. "Every step someone told me no. No loan. No zoning change. No seat at the meeting. And when I asked why, they'd use words like policy or procedure. But I knew the real word they weren't saying." Her chest tightened. "You mean exactly what you think I mean," he said, his gaze locking on hers. "When you're black in a place like this, people make the rules flexible for themselves and rigid for you." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but his attention shifted slightly past her shoulder. She turned, following his gaze. A man at the bar, a middle-aged patron in a crisp golf shirt, was speaking loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Back in my day," he said to his companion, "people knew their place. You didn't see certain folks taking over downtown property. Now they think they own everything." His friend laughed, the sound sharp, ugly. Emily's pulse spiked. She glanced at Marcus, but his face was unreadable, his hands resting calmly on the table. "You're just going to sit there?" she asked quietly, leaning closer. He didn't look at her. "I've learned the difference between a battle and a war." The words carried a weight she could feel in her bones. Still, the restraint in his voice made her restless, as though his silence was both armor and burden. She straightened, unsure how to bridge the space between outrage and composure. "I'm sorry you have to hear that." Marcus finally looked at her, his expression softer now. "Don't apologize for them. They've been making that noise my whole life. It's nothing new." The bar laughter faded into background clatter as another server dropped off a dessert menu. Emily picked it up automatically, but she didn't open it. "I hope you know," she said, her voice quieter now. "Not everyone here thinks like that." He gave a single nod, not quite believing her, not entirely dismissing her either. "We'll see." A busboy passed, and the moment slipped away. Emily stepped back, the sound of fresh plates and clinking glasses filling the gap. From the corner of her eye, she saw Marcus take another slow sip of coffee, his gaze steady on the bar. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was whatever was building inside this room. The clock above the bar ticked toward 8 when the door swung open, letting in a gust of warm night air and a burst of loud laughter. Four men in tailored suits and polished loafers strode in as though they owned the place. Emily knew the type: country club members, board donors, the kind of customers Callahan made a personal point to greet. They headed for the largest booth in the center of the room, their cologne mixing with the faint scent of seared steak. Marcus's gaze lifted briefly before dropping back to his coffee. Emily noticed the way his shoulders tensed, almost imperceptibly, as the group passed. From her station by the register, she overheard the hostess gushing greetings. "Gentlemen, welcome back. Your usual table." The tallest of them, a man with silver hair and a booming voice, surveyed the room. His eyes landed on Marcus. "Well," he said, not bothering to lower his tone. "Looks like our little club's expanding." The others chuckled. One leaned closer to whisper, though his voice still carried, "Didn't know they were letting certain people dine here now." Emily's stomach tightened. She glanced at her coworkers. Kyle avoided her eyes. The hostess kept her smile plastered on. And even the busboy found something suddenly fascinating about rearranging silverware. No one said a word. Marcus remained still, but the air around him seemed to shift. His hands rested lightly on the table, but his spine straightened, and his jaw set in a clean, unyielding line. Emily moved to check on him, unsure if it was to offer comfort or simply to show someone cared enough to approach. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked quietly. He met her eyes. "Not yet." The words were soft, but there was a density in them, like a coiled spring waiting to release. At the wealthy table, the silver-haired man carried on with some embellished story about a golf tournament, his voice cutting across the room. Emily noticed how Marcus's gaze never quite left their table, though he appeared to be looking past them. She thought of what he'd told her earlier about battles and wars, but this felt different. This was no passing slight. This was deliberate public humiliation, the kind designed to test whether a man would shrink or stand. Her pulse quickened. If Marcus responded, she knew the fallout could be ugly. Not just for him, but for anyone who appeared to take his side. And yet, the idea of him staying silent made her feel complicit. In the kitchen, Callahan's voice boomed over the clatter of plates, greeting the regulars as though nothing was amiss. Emily realized he wasn't going to stop it. Back at the booth, Marcus set down his coffee cup with a slow precision, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in decision. Emily saw it then, the quiet shift from endurance to intent. He was going to speak. Marcus rose from his seat with the kind of deliberate calm that made the air in the room shift. Every movement was measured, pushing back the chair, straightening his jacket, resting his hands lightly on the table before stepping forward. The silver-haired man at the center booth leaned back, lips curling into a smirk, as if ready for a performance he expected to win. Marcus's voice came low but carried easily across the dining room. "I couldn't help overhearing," he began. "Your thoughts about who belongs here." A few forks froze halfway to mouths. He took one slow step toward their table. "I've been hearing that question my entire life. When I was 10 years old, a shopkeeper told me I didn't belong in his store because my mother's hands were too dark to touch his merchandise. When I was 22, a bank manager told me my business proposal didn't belong in his office. He said I'd be better off fixing cars. And when I was 38, a man not unlike yourself told me my money might buy me a house, but it wouldn't buy me neighbors who wanted me there." The smirk on the silver-haired man's face faltered, though he tried to mask it with a sip of his drink. "I built my business anyway," Marcus continued. "I bought that shopkeeper's store. I outgrew the bank that turned me away. And I own property in neighborhoods where the only thing my neighbors have to say now is, 'Yes, Mr. Wynn.'" The silence was absolute. The hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, gone. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade. Marcus's gaze swept the room, not lingering on anyone in particular, but letting his words settle like stones on the water. "So if you're wondering why I'm here tonight, I'm here because I can be, because I belong anywhere I choose to be." From her place near the register, Emily felt her chest tighten. Not from fear, but from the weight of hearing someone speak a truth most tried to sidestep. Then came the slow, deliberate clap. Callahan stepped from the kitchen, his smile thin as paper. "Bravo, Mr. Wynn," he said, voice pitched to Carrie. "But let's remember, this is a dining establishment, not a town hall. We like to keep things civil before they get out of hand." The words were smooth, but the warning beneath them was sharp. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply held Callahan's gaze, a quiet challenge passing between them. Emily could see the tension in the room coiling tighter, each second stretching toward something inevitable. Marcus returned to his seat without a word, but the set of his shoulders told her this wasn't over. Callahan didn't retreat. He stepped closer to Marcus's table, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, as though they were merely having a private conversation. "Mr. Wynn," he said, tone smooth as cream, "we appreciate all our guests here, but this is the kind of establishment where proper customers know how to enjoy their evening without unnecessary displays." The room tensed. No one missed the weight behind proper customers. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Proper customers?" he repeated, his voice quiet but cutting. Callahan gave a faint shrug, the gesture dripping with feigned innocence. "People come here for the atmosphere, the refinement, not to hear grievances aired." Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "You want refinement? Let's talk about refinement." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the strain of holding back years of swallowed words. "Refinement is when you train your staff to walk past my table without making eye contact. Refinement is when you tell a new waitress to keep her service quick and quiet. Refinement is letting your wealthy friends speak about me like I'm an intruder, and not saying a damn thing to stop it." The murmurs began, small ripples across the dining room. Callahan's smile thinned further. "Mr. Wynn, No," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You don't get to wrap discrimination in linen tablecloths and call it etiquette. You don't get to serve me a plate and pretend I'm welcome while making sure I feel the weight of every stare in this room." The air shifted. Even the wealthy patrons at the center booth had gone silent, their eyes darting between the two men. Emily stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears. She'd known there was tension here, but hearing it named so plainly cracked something in her. Every whispered comment, every sidelong glance. She could see it now, lined up in a row, undeniable. Callahan's voice dropped, meant only for Marcus but loud enough to carry. "Careful, Mr. Wynn. You might not like how this ends." Marcus met his gaze without blinking. "I've been living with how this ends since I was a boy. The only difference now is that I'm not afraid to call it out." Emily's throat tightened. She realized, in that moment, she couldn't keep hiding behind a server's apron, pretending she was just here to do her job. That excuse was finished. Marcus sat back, his expression calm but resolute. The tension between him and Callahan was a live wire, humming in the air. Emily knew someone else had to step into it. The silence after Marcus's last words was thick enough to hear the faint hum of the ceiling fans. Callahan stood, jaw set, scanning the room as though daring anyone to speak. Emily didn't remember deciding to move, only that her feet carried her forward until she stood at the edge of Marcus's booth, the entire dining room in her periphery. Her hands trembled, but she didn't hide them. "I've been here 2 weeks," she began, her voice soft but carrying in the stillness. "In that time, I've watched the way this place treats some customers differently than others. I've heard the whispers in the kitchen. I've seen people look away instead of saying hello. I've been told to keep my voice down, keep my service quick, and keep my head down when serving Mr. Wynn." A shifting in the room, chairs creaking, someone clearing their throat. Callahan's face darkened. "Emily?" She cut him off. "You told me on my first night not to get cozy with him. You called it just how things are. And I've been hearing versions of that phrase my whole life. But what it really means here is you think it's acceptable to treat someone as less than welcome because of the color of their skin." The silver-haired man at the wealthy table muttered something to his companion, but his voice lacked the same easy arrogance it had earlier. Emily's voice wavered, but she forced herself to keep going. "I've seen busboys roll their eyes when they refill his water. I've seen servers pretend they don't hear him when he asks for something. I've seen a hostess stand right here," she gestured to the spot, "and speak to me instead of him, as if he wasn't even sitting there." Her chest rose and fell, the words now tumbling faster. "This isn't refinement. This isn't good service. It's cowardice dressed up as hospitality. And you," she turned directly to Callahan, "let it happen every single night." The air in the room felt electric, every pair of eyes on her. Some patrons stared down at their plates. Others quietly nodded. Callahan's voice came low, tight. "You don't understand how things work here." "No," she said, meeting his gaze. "I understand perfectly. I just don't agree." Marcus hadn't moved through the entire exchange, his expression unreadable, until now. Something softened at the edges, the faintest glimmer of respect breaking through the guarded lines of his face. Emily exhaled, the knot in her stomach loosening, but the heat in her cheeks remained. "I came here to make tips, not take sides. But some things matter more than keeping a job." She stepped back, and in the pause that followed, the sound of a single fork clinking against a plate rang louder than it should have. A man at a nearby table cleared his throat. "She's right," he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the room. Callahan didn't respond. His glare shifted between Emily and Marcus, the muscles in his jaw tight. Emily realized the line had been crossed. There was no taking her words back, no slipping into the background again. Whatever came next, she'd already chosen her side. Marcus's eyes met hers. "Thank you," he said simply, and in that moment, the gratitude in his voice felt heavier than any applause. Marcus rose from the booth without another word. The half-finished plate of food sat untouched, cooling under the soft glow of the pendant lamp. He slid a crisp bill under his coffee cup, not for the restaurant, but for Emily, and walked toward the door. No one stopped him. No one spoke. The silence followed him across the floor, his footsteps steady against the hardwood, the faint jingle of the door chime marking his exit. Emily stood frozen for half a second before her body moved on instinct. She untied her apron, tossed it onto the hostess stand, and stepped out after him. The night air was warm, the street quiet except for the faint hum of a passing car. Marcus stood by the curb, hands in his pockets, staring down the road as if gathering his thoughts. "Mr. Wynn," she called softly. He turned, the streetlight catching the silver at his temples. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, and she worried she'd crossed into a space she didn't belong. But then he gave a small nod, an invitation to speak. "I just couldn't let them get away with it," she said. "Not in front of me, not again." His eyes held hers, calm but heavy with meaning. "You realize what that's going to cost you?" Emily exhaled, the truth sitting in her chest like a stone. Yeah, but there are worse things than losing a job. A faint smile touched his lips. That's true. And most people spend their whole lives pretending it's not. They stood there for a long moment, the hum of the restaurant behind them like a muffled reminder of the world they'd just walked out of. I'm sorry, she said finally. For what? That you've had to live with this all the time. Marcus's gaze drifted upward, to the soft spill of stars over the quiet street. Don't be sorry, just don't forget. She nodded, feeling the words settle somewhere deep. From inside the restaurant came the muffled sound of chairs scraping, voices picking up again. Life was already returning to normal in there, the tension dissolving now that the problem, the two of them, was outside. Emily looked back at the doorway. You know, I think that's the last time I'll ever see that place from this side. You quitting? I already quit, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The second I opened my mouth in there. Marcus gave a slow nod, a look of respect replacing whatever guardedness remained. Then you'll be fine. You know who you are. The words landed with more weight than she expected. They stood together in the stillness, neither rushing to leave. The streetlight cast long shadows at their feet, stretching out like paths they might take from here. You should know, Marcus said. What you did in there, it matters. People saw it. Even if they won't say it out loud tonight, they'll remember. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to crack the silence. Emily swallowed, her throat tight. And what if nothing changes? It will, he said. Not all at once. But every crack in the wall is a step toward bringing it down. She didn't know if it was hope or conviction in his tone, but it made her believe him, if only for this moment. Marcus glanced toward his car, then back at her. You take care, Emily. You too, Mr. Wynne. They parted at the curb, each heading in opposite directions, the quiet night swallowing their footsteps. Emily didn't look back at the restaurant. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of the choice she'd made, and for once, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like air filling her lungs. As she walked toward her small apartment, she thought of all the people in that dining room who had stayed silent, of all the others in this town who had done the same for years. And she thought of Marcus's words about cracks in the wall. One voice, she realized, could be enough to start the break. And in a place still clinging to its prejudice, the sound of that first fracture was the beginning of something that couldn't be silenced again.